There's a line in the chapter of the big book that is the chapter I hate the most. I think I've said that before in a lot of videos, and that's the We Agnostics chapter, where it says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome our problems, or something along that line, that we could have recuperated a long time ago, and that, such codes and philosophies fail us, blah, 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 blah. And of course, what they're really doing is they're saying that everything in life that you've ever formulated in terms of belief systems or ethics or maybe even your religious practices has utterly failed you because you couldn't successfully overcome your addictive behavior. And what they're doing is, of course, selling you cult religion. That's what the whole entire We Agnostics chapter is about. They're telling you, you're a failure at everything, you're useless, you're worthless, and you're going to have to accept our phony cult religion, or you've got no hope whatsoever of getting well, even though they'll tell you that, it's a suggested program only, but you'll die if you don't swallow the religion, right? Well, it would occur to me not too long ago. I mean, it's not something that I formulated on my own. It was something I read on the Armored Papers website in fine print on one of his many topics where he's just destroying AA, and it mentioned that just because you're having difficulty overcoming your addictive behavior doesn't necessarily that doesn't equate to powerlessness. That it just simply means you're having difficulty overcoming your addictive behavior. That you're having problems putting the bottle down. It really doesn't have anything to do with a sense of ethics or a sense of philosophy or a sense of or even your religious practices necessarily. I mean, I grew up in a predominantly Roman Catholic neighborhood, and the church was more or less the central focal point of the whole entire community. Although, in the Catholic Church, you can drink. I mean, most of the priests I grew up around were heavy drinkers. But, leaving that aside, I know this is usually the point in AA meetings where, when this topic is read, everybody's got to jump in and they got to say something about how they grew up with religion and religion didn't save them and they had to drop religion and, they're anti-religious now. And of course, only AA saved them. Excuse me. And, you know the standard lines by now, I'm sure, if you're watching these videos. And it was not even clear to me during the time when I was in the rooms at Quackaholics Anonymous what they were doing with this. It's funny, the longer you're away from the AA cult and the longer you're away from the AA religion, the more clarity it seems that you gain about what this whole entire exercise is all about. What it's about is trying to do what happens so much in their literature and in their steps and in those meetings and everything else. What they're doing is trying to break your sense of accomplishment, your sense of self, your sense of the things that may bring you comfort in life, like, let's just say, for the sake of argument, philosophy, uh, or your sense of ethics, or your religion, or your spirituality, or whatever it is you might call it, or your art, whatever methods you have for coping mechanisms. These are utter failures to be rejected, and you have to throw them all away, and you have to just swallow cult dogma. And it's really strange to me that they, will talk about a mere code of morals won't save you, but then they want you to do a moral inventory, and they want you to confess the exact nature of your wrongs, and then they want you to wallow in guilt and shame, and then they want you to admit that you are useless, that you're a nobody, and that you'll always be that way. I mean, so if a mere code of morals won't stop you, why are they having the suggested program of the 12 steps all about moral inventory? And how come their whole entire literature is filled with all this talk of morals? Which leads me to an even more interesting question. Is there anything remotely moral about AA whatsoever? I think you already probably know how I feel about that if you've seen any of my previous videos. But the first thing that had popped into my mind was I remember there were some AA people. There was the pilot ship sponsor I used to have. I don't know if he was just doing this for the attention. I think likely he was, but he was always bashing the Catholic Church. He was always talking about there was nothing stupider than a Catholic, and he was always telling sponsees that were Catholic they were probably going to drink unless they fired the Catholic God, you know, and all this. Just it's so fucking stupid. It doesn't even bear repeating or giving any weight to it. But ultimately, they're telling you to ditch everything you believed and just believe everything they want you to believe, and everything become an automated puppet. To me, it's not really moral to break a man's character, to attack a man's sense of self, to destroy his own sense of being or his own sense of worth, and to tell him that, you know, he has to reach even an even greater place of pain in order to accept what they call spiritual help. I'm not sure if that's exactly moral when you really examine what the whole entire thing encompasses. I mean, is it really moral to use your status in Quackaholics Anonymous, your 25-year badges, and your little hierarchy to crush and denigrate people who cannot seem to overcome their addictive behavior? Is it really moral to look at people who are, you know, when they commit suicide or when they overdose and say, you know, God loves me more than them? Is it really moral to protect sex predators and con artists and frauds and drug dealers in your meetings because personal recovery depends upon AA unity? AA unity means you protect the guilty, as I've said before. Can anything about that be remotely moral? And of course, morality is a loose term these days. I mean, well, it always has been, to be honest. But, you know, whenever I hear the word morality, I kind of inwardly cringe because, like I said, I grew up in a very strict Catholic-type community. And I was, you know, very deeply devoted, actually, to the Catholic Church. It's hard to believe now. I mean, I'm about as far away from being Christian as, you know, you could, daylight and dark, you know, right here. And a lot of people it was kind of funny, Quackaholics Anonymous wanted to say, you stopped believing in God because you had a bad experience and it turned you away from spiritual principles. You know, it's also kind of painted very clearly throughout their literature. It's funny. Here's another contradiction right here I'm about to point out. They attack you if you abandon your religion, or if you abandon belief in God, or if you just choose to not identify as a religious person or something like that. But then they turn around and they'll tell you that religious people can't probably make it in the program because they're holding on to old ideas and old conceptions. You know, they kind of talk about being accepting of other religions, but it's very obvious in their overall tone that they think they're far superior to any religious path. After all, they're saying all religions are going to fail you and all philosophical convictions are going to fail you, that everything is going to fail you, and unless you're with them and swallowing their dogma, you know, you're pretty much useless. You know, they're breaking your spirit. But they'll turn around and say that you probably stopped believing in God, or you probably left religion because you had a bad experience. And interestingly enough, I can share this personal tidbit. You know, when I had mentioned in the early days of coming into AA, I wasn't really anybody when it comes to a religious idea. I mean, I don't even know what you could have classified me as. I was no longer Christian. I didn't identify with anything. And, you know, I guess more than anything else, if you had really pinned me up against the wall and you had said, you know, what do you believe? I'd have probably said, I don't believe in anything. But the automatic assumption everybody made was, you know, well, you must have had a bad experience in your life, and, you know, your petty little feelings got trampled on and you turned your back on God. You know, it's really strange. They're not a religious program, but they're, you know, that sounds very preachy to me. It sounds like a very religious stance to make. And, you know, I tried to explain to them my own little personal story, which, I mean, it's nothing major. It's nothing dramatic, really. It's probably millions of people out there have the same identical story as me. I mean, I was very deeply religious throughout most of my childhood and even all the way up into my young adulthood. And even during all the dark tragedies that I've endured in my life, I mean, dark tragedy sounds a bit melodramatic, but I have gone through some pretty major downfalls in my younger years. You know, death of my father, death of my grandfather, a couple of other things that I dealt with. At those times, I actually was not turned away uh, from religion during those times. I was actually, if anything, it turned me closer to the church. I mean, I met with priests more often than I normally would have. You know, I mean, may have been religious, but I still love to drink and smoke pot and, you know, do all those other things. But I mean, I really would turn really strongly to the church during those times of bereavement and those times of grief and times of uncertainty. And, you know, and we would go over things and I would discuss things with them and I would read the books as they suggested to me and I would, you know, attend church services. I would volunteer to work in the hospitals, you know, the Catholic hospitals with the sick and the dying, etc. And it really wasn't the religion itself that was turning me off at that time. At that time, it was the fact that the more I began to study about it, about the histories, the more I began to read the Bible, the more I began to really delve deeply, I guess, into what the faith entails. I'm not knocking your faith if that's your faith, you know, but for me personally, there was all kinds of questions, intellectually, emotionally, personal experiences that led me to have those questions. And I could go on and on forever about that, but just eventually, somewhere along the way, I realized I didn't believe like that any longer. It wasn't like I had a, you know, a great tragedy and I just turned out and walked down to church and said, fuck all of it. It was actually a process. It was a process that happened over a period of 2 or 3 years. Just somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't praying any longer. I wasn't going to masses any longer. I wasn't making any appointments with priests any longer. And, you know, it was just, it had become something that I just no longer believed in. And I had my various reasons for it. And I did go through a period, a slight, just a little period where I was pretty, I guess you could say, really, not really angry about it all. I was just kind of bitter about it all. You know, I don't want to hear the shit any more than I wanted to hear AA crap when I had finally left that. But because this little tale I'm telling didn't fit their narrative, they didn't want to hear it, you know, because it didn't fit into their neat little package of what, you know, all the other Quackaholics were saying at the time. You know, this so-called moral inventory where they want you to be completely honest and where they want you to be completely forthright and forthcoming is really just more indoctrination exercises, because no matter what you say, no matter what your personal experiences are, no matter what you're going through in life or what, you know, anything, no matter what, they just revert it back to the same thing. You are selfish, self-centered, sick, you know, full of resentment, full of fear, and on and on and on and on with all of that. And, you know, and ultimately the overall message at the end of that, when you're talking to your sponsor with your fucking fist step or whatever, is, you know, look at this. Just look at this history of you. What a terrible person you are. What a shitty person you are. You've never been a good person one time in your whole entire life. And this proves beyond a shadow of all reasonable doubt that you have to bend the knee and surrender. You know, is that really a moral message? I mean, to really break a man in such a way that he doesn't have any self-confidence left, to make him feel like he's the worst human being on the face of the earth imaginable, to take trivialities that may have happened in his life, to take, you know, minor things that I did in life. I mean, when I look back on them now, it was like, okay, I got stressed out over that, and that really wasn't that big of a friggin' deal, you know. But when they were doing my inventories with me and everything, they just magnified it out of proportion and made me believe that I was just genuinely a truly terrible individual. And of course, looking back on that now, with some time away, it's very obvious what that's about. The hierarchy wants you they want to drag you down to their level, you know, when they want you to be scum like they are. If you ever really notice, if you're ever really hanging out in the meetings, after the meetings and stuff like that, there's none of the old-timer gurus, old whiners, old slimers, I don't know, I can't decide what I really want to call them, but there's nobody that ever has anything really remotely good to say about anybody else, you know. My last sponsor, that's all he could do. I mean, about every single person in the room that had, you know, even the double-digit ones, you know, well, you know, let me tell you something about him. Let me tell you something about him. Every single person. And of course, I found out later on a lot of what he was saying was actually made up bullshit. Even though the other old slimers were scum like he was. But the petty rivalry, the petty jealousy, the whole obsession with making out everybody else to be total shit. just like he is. I guess it's a way for them to feel kind of a little bit superior about themselves, which to me is not a very moral or ethical behavior. Or even how about altruism? They often talk about their whole purpose in life is to just help other people. I mean, does that really sound like a helpful attitude? Does that really sound like something that would attract you to an individual, that you would have trust in him, that you'd have confidence in him, that you would confess all these deep, dark secrets to them, and they would, either laugh at you like what happened to me, or they'd spread it around the rooms like what happened to me, or they would just look down on you with this smug self-assurance. It's another way to crush your spirit a little bit more. That doesn't sound like really moral behavior. I mean, no wonder they say if a mere code of morals could have saved us. Well, they don't have any morals, and I'm pretty much firmly convinced a lot of the people in those rooms never had any morals. I think they were just scumbags that found another place to fit in with AA, and they realized they could be heroes by saying that they hadn't had a drink in 20 years. I mean, that's really all you need to qualify for sainthood, is to be able to just really blab the lingo. You don't really have to actually do anything in your personal life as far as drinking is concerned, as far as drug use is concerned, as far as any other behaviors that I would actually personally call immoral. You don't have to do any of those. All you need to do is be able to say all the right things in the meetings and create a really good pitch for the audience to laugh in the appropriate places and clap in the appropriate places, and for the people to nod at the appropriate places with your phony wisdom. That's really all that's required to have a license to do whatever you want to do to other people. And how is that moral exactly? I mean, supposedly, in this moral inventory that they're doing, did none of them discover that, taking advantage of vulnerable people is possibly immoral? Did none of them discover that stealing from people because they're new and they're vulnerable and they haven't actually, they're not clearly thinking on their own 2 feet yet, that maybe that's not quite so moral either? I mean, what exactly are in these moral inventories that they're doing? That they've supposedly had this big psychic change and they're so spiritual now. I mean, it's obvious there's nothing remotely even close to what even the most extreme of relativists would consider moral. I know there was a discussion thread that popped up in one of the online groups the other day that kind of is what gave me the idea for this video anyway, but it was a lady talking about, confessional, Catholic confessional, which I have a little bit of experience with growing up and all of that. But it was talking about the noted differences between AA and between, say, a religious practice. And I don't normally defend religion, any other religions. I mean, sometimes I don't even defend my own pagan religion because of the conduct of some of the members in it. I mean, that's kind of another difference between us, the group of people I'm involved with, or I guess you could say the movement of people I'm involved with, Quackaholics Anonymous. If you ask any of us, and I'm not saying we're all just great people, but I'm saying if you ask a lot of us, what is the one problem plaguing your movement today, we'd probably say, well, some of the people that's in the movement calling themselves members, of this particular pagan culture that fuck it up for everybody else, because you see some obnoxious asshole do some vile deed, and then he claims that there are no such things as concrete morals or something like that. It really pisses you off. I agree there's no such thing as necessarily concrete morals in terms of written in stone, but I think you get the idea of what I'm saying. I don't have to, give you a long dissertation and lesson on that. You're probably not interested anyway. But anyway, back to what I was talking about. She was talking about that, coming out of the confessional, there's a kind of a stress on, forgiveness, and a stress on, the love of God, and the stress on those kinds of things. And, in Quackaholics Anonymous, it's a lot different. And I can personally attest to this about confession. I don't know if you've ever, you've probably seen the movies, where some guy goes in a confessional, usually it's in some horror movie or action movie, he gets shot in the confessional or stabbed, or, the demon reaches through and pulls the priest out and, does whatever with him. But it's, of course, needless to say, it's not really like that. But The first time I went into one of those confessionals, of course, I mean, there was the fact that your face is hidden. There's the fact that, you know, there was some privacy. There's the fact that they're under a vow not to talk. That doesn't mean they don't talk. That doesn't mean I trust priests, okay? I grew up around priests. I grew up around drunk thug type priests. I don't know about these child molester tales, but I know that. If you've ever seen the movie Sleepers with Robert De Niro, that's exactly what my hometown was like growing up. So, I mean, if you ever want to figure out what my childhood was like, just watch that movie Sleepers. But literally, like when I made, you know, some confessions of a time, I mean, the priest would, you know, they would say, well, you know, what do you think you can do to avoid these temptations? You know, these horrible temptations of marijuana, and, you know, and other things. But they would, you know, they'd give you a penance. You'd go pray, and you know, they'd tell you to read something, and they would tell you, you know, usually the message they would leave you with is something like, you know, now is the time to be strong. You know, you got to remember, you know, in times of when the flesh is so weak, you know, you have to be strong. You have to be strong to do this. You know, you can do this. You know, you've got the power of, you know, God behind you and all of that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of it that falls on you in choice. There's a lot that falls on you making an actual choice about it. And like I said, I don't really like defending it, but, you know, what I'm saying is in Quackaholics Anonymous, when you make a confession and a fifth step, what you're told is, like I've already said, you're told the same things you hear in meetings. Well, look at what you did here when you were 5 years old, you know. God, you were a piece of shit, you know. Look what you did here when you were 12, you know. God, you know, you're fucking worthless, you know. You're just selfish, you know. You're just the most horrible thing ever, you know. You drove drunk one time. I mean, normal people don't drive drunk. I mean, do you know what kind of monster you are, you know? And you can see right here clearly, it's all spelled out. There's your life story, you know. Oh, you obviously are never going to amount to jack shit unless you surrender to the cult. It sounds a lot like an abusive parent, you know, and I know a little bit of thing. I know a thing or two about abuse. I'm not going to go into a lot of details about that, but I know a thing or two about abuse. And abuse is always in that kind of form, you know. We're beating the shit out of you because it's good for you. You know, we're treating you like garbage because it's good for you. You know, we're fucking up your emotions because it's good for you. I'm not saying, you know, just that slight difference in, I guess you could say, the attitude, you know, maybe. You know, it kind of cracks me up how I'll see them in meetings talking about, I grew up in organized religion, and I couldn't deal with organized religion. Today I have a loving God. Does it mean that your God loves you even when you're stealing from people and fucking people over, or preying on people that are vulnerable sexually, or when you're just flat out breaking the will of somebody who's brand new and came to you for help? I mean, is that what you mean? Oh, I'm loved anyway because I hadn't had a drink in a long time. You know, I guess that's their code of morals, which isn't really morals, you know, when you think about it. But it, okay, I lost my train of thought there for a second. I was going to meander. Breaking someone's will and telling someone to be strong has a bit of a difference between daylight and dark. Even if I don't necessarily like the structure of religion, or I don't agree with the religion of say, whatever your religious practices is, I'm not going to go on the attack mode about it. I don't really and truly, this is the way I feel about actual religious practices, is that, you know, if that's how you believe and that's how you feel, then, you know, it's fine. It's fine as far as you don't try to infringe it on me. Now, of course, an AA person is going to jump in right here at this point. They're going to say, well, that's not true. That's not true at all. You're a liar because you don't allow AA people to believe the way they want to believe. No, I don't. Because the minute you start fucking up people's lives, and the minute you're in bed with the court systems, and the minute that you're in bed with the legal systems, and the minute that you have created a multi-billion-dollar a year treatment center industry that's an utter fail, that has killed more people than it has helped, then I have a major problem with you. No, you don't really get the right to be excluded from criticism. I mean, I really hate it when the people want to say, well, you know, you never say anything good about AA. There's good things about AA. Well, there's a lot more bad than there is good. Now, I could rant and rave about how I feel about other religions or spiritual practices, but that's not exactly has nothing really to do with the subject of this video, because let's think about it this way. I mean, if I found out, for instance, that there was a judge that was sentencing people who were found with possession of pot or possession of meth or, you know, drinking and driving to First Baptist Church, and in order for them to get out of their legal sentence, they had to be baptized to be saved. I don't think I would be alone in saying that the country would be in outrage. The country would be upset. The country would say you can't use a judicial body to force people into something like that. Or if you had a judge that was sitting up there saying, you know, you have to attend the Church of Scientology in order to get out of going to prison, you know, a bribery type system. You know, either you go to the Church of Scientology and you join the Scientology movement, you know, or we're going to throw you in prison for a long, long time. I don't think there's anybody in the country that wouldn't be yelling for the fact that that judge does not need to be sitting on that bench. However, it goes on in AA throughout the country, you know, throughout the court systems. The court system in this city is really fucked up when it comes to the drug court behaviors. In fact, I'm going to do another video on that pretty soon. But when you got people being forced against their will into your religion, then yeah, I got a major problem with it. I mean, and any other religion in the nation that would actually mandate, strong arm, browbeat, or outright bribe people into having to become members, or else I have a problem with that. I may get attacked in the comment section, you know, with people saying, you know, certain religions that do that. I'm well aware of that. I'm not a total idiot giving religion a pass. But on the subject matter of AA and its moral inventory, even though it's a program that's not supposed to be moral, and it's immoral behavior, I think I've said probably all I can say for this week. So I guess that's about all for now. See you guys next week.